I want to talk to you today some of the research that we're doing in the center, some of the key ideas that we're working with here as well. Also, some of these are come from a book that I'm finishing now for MIT Press called The Stack on Software and Sovereignty. I'm in the arts department, my background is political philosophy, so I'm going to take the prerogative of this art philosophy conjunction to cause more conceptual problems than solve them. The first thing I want to sort of put on the table then for our discussion is that our interest, I think, should not really and can't really be in the development of the futurity of particularly digital systems in relationship just to the institution or machine that we understand as the modern nation state. There's a difference between governance and governments and governmentality. And I think that the extent to which we can keep these separate, we'll have this right. We can't only focus on this nation state in the discrete sub-jurisdictions. We need to assume that the future of governance may be something quite different, and that the terms of its emergence, like any significant historical emergence, is something that we can only very partially control or design in advance. So how the essential questions of governmentality, that is sovereignty, legal identity, currencies, territorial integrity, imagined communities, militation, etc., these have only been monopolies of the state for a very short time, and there's no reason to believe that they will continue to necessarily be in the future. Though the inverse is also true. There may be things that have traditionally been outside the domain of the state that get brought in, as we see in many cases in China, for example. Okay, so this first track I just want to put very quickly is what we call in eco-biopolitics. That is, if you think, we understand that the beginning of the archaic state 10,000 years ago begins with agriculture, that biopolitics is essential to governmentality. And today, biopolitics means something different. It's not just, as James Scott says, what states can see, it's also what states can sense. Sensing carbon, sensing energy, sensing disease, sensing microbes. It's governing and sensing not just human beings, but also other species of life and phyla. In a couple weeks, and we're all talking about the H7N9 virus in China, this issue of the sensing of non-human political subjects will be, I think, very important. The second part of is we're looking at the ways in which eco-governance produces the conditions of new modes of jurisdictionality. Think about, for example, the coalition of island states, which is a big, an important actor in the climate talks. A completely non-contiguous collective political subjectivity that's shown mostly by its equatorial condition, but also by the fact that it's affected by climate change in a particular kind of way. The response to these emergencies in this way produce the conditions for new kinds of coalitions of jurisdictionality. Second is what we call the Cloud Polis project, which I talked a little bit about, which has to do with the ways in which cloud platforms take on some of these essential roles of governmentality. You might remember a couple of years ago, there was a very strange event where someone at Google shifted the border on Google Maps between Nicaragua and Costa Rica. And Nicaragua mobilized their army and took the territory that Google had bequeathed them. And it was all resolved. But if you think of the historical role of the state to first determine the territory upon which civil society might occupy, the fact that the cloud platform would able to flip this sort of this layer within the stack is enormously interesting. So what we're looking at with this is both the way in which states become cloud platforms and cloud platforms become states, or take on the role of those essential forms of governmentality in and of themselves. So things like the Google-China conflict, where you have one logic of sovereignty and another logic here, are sort of superimposed upon each other, unresolved. These are the key issues. And one of the things that they imply is the traditional Westphalian logics of jurisdictionality, of subdivided loops on a two-dimensional plane next to each other, can't describe the situation. We need to think in terms of more polydimensional geometries of geography, by which the sovereign claims over a person or a site or a state may be claimed by multiple things existing in layers that are not commensurate. Right? So a thought about cosmopolitanism can't be about universalism and consensus. It has to be about those kinds of dissensual relations. So this third one really is about new jurisdictions, or what we call Westphalia II, non-contiguous jurisdictions, USA super jurisdictions, going up to servers for Pirate Bay, or customs in Germany, where you go through the U.S. customs in Germany, not to mention the detention centers. So last thing is just, where do these new modes of governmentality come from? Historically, they come from three things. Common relationships to common infrastructure, the taxation of flows and ports, and lastly, emergencies. So if we think that after Paul Virilio, that the invention of any new technology is the invention of a new accident definition, that the inverse is true. The invention of a new accident is also the invention of a new technology. Thank you.